Those of you who follow true crime sagas know that every story has multiple sides. But what happens when one story spins off in multiple directions? New narratives that seemingly take everything you thought you know about a story and turn it completely upside down. That's what we're dealing with the Rose Petal murder, the most complicated, convoluted, and disturbing story that we've ever covered. Welcome to FITSNews. I'm Will Folks, the founding editor. This is a very special edition of our Week in Review as we focus exclusively on the Rose Petal murder, a case out of Greenville County, South Carolina that shocked the South Carolina upstate and sent conspiracy theorists and true crime aficionados scratching their heads for the truth. This is a story which involves four key principles: the murder victim, the accused killer, the fiance of the victim, and a mysterious music producer from Italy who, according to some, has orchestrated the entire saga. Now, the story begins on October 13, 2021, when police were called to Greer, South Carolina, a suburb in the upstate of South Carolina, where they found a woman, Christina Parcell, ritualistically slain. We call this the Rose Petal murder because one of the first pieces of information to emerge from the crime scene were reports that rose petals, or dead-headed roses, had been sprinkled around her posed body in the living room of a home owned by her sister. Now, this story, again, shocked the upstate, sent many in fear as the individual who perpetrated it was not immediately identified. But as the story unfolded, different individuals, including those that we referenced earlier, began to play into the story. To get a handle on the crime scene, we sat down with Chad Ayers, a former master deputy with the Greenville County Sheriff's Office and the head of Proactive Response Group, a firm out of Greenville, South Carolina that handles an array of security needs. Chad sat down with our research director, Jen Wood, for a detailed discussion of what police found and what it meant to their investigation. Here is that conversation.
Chad, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this crazy crime. It was totally brutal and unexpected. It occurred in the middle of the morning on a Wednesday. Um, Greer is pretty sleepy. It's a pretty sleepy area. So, as a former investigator, you arrived to a crime scene like this. What are the first things that you're looking at?
That's a great question. And you're exactly right, Jim. That community where this took place is directly across from the elementary school that I went to. It's directly across from the neighborhood I grew up in, and this is a very tight knit community in that area. A lot of people around, a lot of kids outside playing. So obviously, the first thing any investigator is going to do is try to preserve that crime scene from the outside in. So obviously, your patrol officers, deputies are already on scene, have secured it, have discovered the crime scene. They've now notified the investigators that, hey, look, we have a death investigation. They'll come out. Obviously, the scene will already be taped off with crime scene, and then we're just taking it piece by piece. Obviously, the coroner has to come in and do their job just to confirm everything on their end. But I am starting from the street level and just doing an initial walkthrough around the house, inside the house. What all do I see? And that's a good baseline for my investigation. Just so I, as an investigator, can gather some information of, okay, where is the decedent at? What does this look like? At face, do we have at face a homicide, a suicide, a natural death? And then now, obviously, you walk into a crime scene like they did over in Canebrake, and you're very quickly going to realize that we have a brutal homicide. You're going to then solicit some more resources from the agency to start help in this investigation.
Now, in a press conference, Sheriff Hobart Lewis gave some of the details of just how gruesome this crime was. Christina Parcell was stabbed 31 times in the head and neck area. To me, my initial thoughts when reading that doesn't sound like something a stranger would do. It just seems very, very aggressive, very angry. As an investigator, would you read into that initially as, a stranger, or that maybe the victim knew the person who'd murdered them?
Of course, any of the listeners obviously know, you watch any type of crime shows Dateline on Friday night. Obviously, as I've gotten older, I've turned into like my parents, and Friday night is the Dateline after dinner type of thing. But excuse me. But yeah, first and foremost, you're going to think this is personal, right? A domestic type situation. Look, it's 2025 now. Very rarely you don't ever see just random brutal homicides like this, like a robbery gone bad, especially in a neighborhood like that. So obviously, at the beginning, I'm going to start looking at close friends, family members, domestic type settings, to try to rule them out to begin with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, we've heard from sources close to the investigation that there were, the crime scene was staged. The solicitor noted that in his remark, it had ritualistic components. And what we're hearing from sources is that those ritualistic components are roses or dead roses sprinkled around Christina Parcel's body. Um, have you ever seen a crime scene like that? I mean, that is just bizarre.
When that first started getting reported, I thought, am I reading some type of crime novel or some type of deep book? In my experience in my career, obviously I did some time cross training in homicide, so I have worked these types of investigations before. But I was never assigned full time to a homicide unit where you're dealing with this all the time. But this is definitely a once in a lifetime type of weird crime scene to walk in for any type of investigator. And again, I think what it's doing, just like the multiple stab wounds on Christina Parcell, it's drawing in law enforcement, it's drawing in those investigators, and showing, look, this was planned. There's a lot of forethought that went into this homicide to cover their tracks and to make this look like whatever the suspect was trying to do, or what was he exactly trying to do? Was he trying to show, investigators that it was somebody close? Is he just trying to throw the whole thing off? But let's be honest, this case has not been clean cut and easy to follow at all through any investigation.
Yeah, no, it's one of the most bizarre stories I've ever heard, and it's hard to even tell. And I was reading through the initial reports, the incident report from the murder scene, and I noted that Bradley Post, Christina Parcel's fiance, was the person who found her body and reported it to 911. And the first responding deputy, noted some very weird behavior. He, in the report said that Post became nervous and asked if he needed to speak with his lawyer. And the deputy said he, quote, found this odd because he's just asking basic questions about the incident at the time. And then he said Post, while they were searching the residence, he put gloves on during the process. So they also noted that as odd. Um, is that something, you know, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's easy now that this case has played out a little bit, and
Right.
what Bradley Post has been charged with. The sicko that has child pornography and everything else on his computer. Um, Obviously, he's in a state of panic. Do I think Bradley Post knew that this was going to take place, and do I think he was involved? I don't. I think that the trial and Solicitor Wilkins is going to do a good job painting the picture as to, what pushed Hughes and to commit this horrific crime. But I think anybody, you don't have to be a seasoned investigator or a seasoned deputy to realize when the person who discovers the decedent starts putting on rubber gloves. Who the hell carries rubber gloves on them, or where do you go get them? I mean, this thing's wacky to begin with. But again, this would raise some suspicion to anybody. And again, if I'm that investigator, the first person I'm going to interview is who had last contact with Christina Parcell. And obviously, with the relationship that we now know that Post and Parcell had, he's going to be one of the first people that I interview. And I'm going to try to poke holes in the story any way I can, until I can rule him out as a suspect.
Right. There is a substantial amount of evidence collected at the crime scene. Memory cards, a laptop, a cell phone found near Christina's body, which was sent in for data extraction. envelopes containing $500 of cash, a baggie with an unidentified white substance, a gun, USB drives. I mean, they did a blue star spray test that was conducted, that tested positive for the presence of blood in the bedrooms. I mean, the crime scene seems chaotic, and they collected a lot of electronic evidence. So as they're going through the crime scene, the technicians are, gathering all this evidence. What are they looking at in terms of, what they're collecting, what they're processing, and what tests they're going to run?
That's a great question. And let's go back to Post wanting to walk around with investigators, right? He knows what's in that house, right? Not as far as the murder scene, but he knows that there's damning evidence on thumb drives, cell phones, computers in that residence, more than likely. So that's probably why he's walking around trying to divert their attention from the items that's going to be damning to him, to more of the crime scene. But obviously, Jen, you've worked a lot of great high profile cases, over your career, and and looking at them. I guess the best way is let's go back to when we were commentating on the Murdaugh case. Digital footprints are everywhere, right? So that is what investigators are going to use. Look, this is our lifeline. We walk around with it 24/7. It was funny. I actually watched an interview with Tiger Woods the other day, and he was talking about how early on in his career, you make a big putt, and all the crowd is sitting there clapping for you. When you made a big putt early in his career. Now you don't hear it anymore because everyone has this up trying to record that big putt. So digital evidence is very key, and it has been the reason why so many high profile cases have been solved. Look, criminals aren't smart. That's why they do the things they do, and they get caught. They Google things. They think that I'm just clearing my phone history, it's going to make it go away. But just like our vehicles, we start thinking about ways to cover up digital footprints, right? We have Hughes parking his car somewhere else, riding his bicycle. And I know I'm probably jumping ahead, but it all goes to this digital idea of knowing that my car is a computer tracking in my every move. So he did what he could, and I think everyone did exactly what they could to try to cover that digital footprint. But again, they're going through, they're going to check, they're spraying down different rooms to see, well, where did this start? Did this start in a bathroom? Did this start in a bedroom? Is there a presence for blood in the bed? Is there a presence of blood in the back room, in the bathroom, in the kitchen? Trying to get a good idea of where was Christina Parcell when, the suspect Hughes came in and did this.
Right. So, that's like I said, it always appeared to me like it was a very chaotic crime scene. And I do think that digital evidence made a huge impact in the success of their investigation. And like you said, in terms of Zachary Hughes's eventual arrest, they used primarily Ring doorbell camera and flock camera footage, to apprehend him.
Well, Jen, let me
And
interrupt you
before,
right there.
yeah.
What was the time frame? Because one thing I don't know, what was the time frame on those Ring doorbells? Do we know approximately how long Hughes was inside the residence?
It wasn't a long time. I think, I want to say 30 minutes at most. And that might actually be long. I don't remember the actual time frame, but it was short.
Sure.
And, you know, so they caught him on the neighbor's doorbell camera, leaving on the bike with a hood on, a backpack, and then they picked him up on the flock camera. So he takes his bike back to his truck. And this is really the first experience I've had with flock cameras. I really had to look at the use of flock cameras and how they present in investigations. Can you explain them a little?
Again, I want to be very careful how much detail I go into because
Yeah.
they're used in a lot of investigations. But basically, um, at a 30,000 foot view, let's basically just put it on a toll road when you're going through a toll and you've got cameras that are picking up your license plates and pictures of the driver. Um,
Right.
Law enforcement has the technology in a lot of major cities to put up cameras in various locations, whether at intersections. And obviously, without going into potential locations where flock cameras are in this county, um,
Right.
but they are a great tool to use. Look, it I wish that they were around when I was, an investigator, especially working narcotics cases, because, you can plug in license plates, for it to basically pick up and alert you if it drives down a certain road. Um, they have been used to solve a whole lot of crime and also catch a whole lot of wanted suspects.
Right. Do you think, in terms of the prosecution, do you think that type of evidence is received well by a jury? That to me seems to be, in the Murdoch case, we didn't have a lot of visual evidence. We used a lot of like data points from his cellular devices. But I think in this case, we do have camera footage that is going to come into evidence. Does that typically play better with a jury?
Of course, I think jurors want to see something, um, instead of just hearing, or seeing a map of waypoints. Actually seeing the suspect's vehicle, actually seeing the suspect on the bike, it kind of shows and it brings it to home that, you know, Hughes better have a pretty dang good reason why he was riding his bike right in front of Parcel's house with the connection Hughes has to Parcel. But I think that's going to be a very big damning piece of evidence in this case, along with any type of other DNA, that the state may or may not have.
And speaking of that connection that Zachary Hughes, the only connection that Zachary Hughes has to Christina Parcell is the father of her young child, John Mello. Yet he hasn't been charged in connection with this murder. We hear his name a lot in the court documents and in press conferences leading up to this trial. But the only thing he's been charged with is criminal conspiracy and harassment in conjunction with nude photos that him and Hughes had distributed of Christina Parcell in June and July before the murder occurred. Now, that being said, there is evidence that they got off of Zachary Hughes' cell phone, the WhatsApp, its encrypted messaging service, that indicates that there could have been knowledge by John Mello of this murder. He hasn't been arrested yet. What do you think about that?
I think I'm thinking what everyone else is thinking. Here's your connection right here. I mean, I could go on for 30 minutes on a tangent on this. Look, let's take a step back and understand that you've got a father who probably gets information or finds out that his young daughter is being sexually abused, or illicit photos being taken of this young child. He's trying to distance himself from what he wants to do. So he has his good buddy, the world renowned piano player, Mr. Hughes. First of all, I want to know how the hell this conversation starts. How do you reach out to your buddy and say, hey, listen, there's some sick stuff going on with my, child's mother and her boyfriend. Come over here. Let's discuss a few things, But I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put this thing together. But obviously, if you were asking me my thoughts, I think that Mello found out. I got to be very careful here, but
Yeah,
I think that it's
yeah,
very important to know that there are many people. I mean, go back to what was the movie with Matthew McConaughey where the little girl he was the
a
lawyer,
time to
A
kill.
Time to Kill,
Hmm.
right? You find out something horrible has happened to your children. There's not a parent in this world that's not going to defend their children. Look, I'm not advocating the murder of anybody when I say that, but people protect their kids. They protect their families. Mama bear, Papa
Yeah.
bear get mad. Is this what happened? I believe so. I believe there's a reason why Zachary Hughes does not want the state getting into his phone and seeing his encrypted messages or whatever other messages that are out there between him and Mello. There's just no other reason that brings Zachary Hughes into this. Does this mean that Mello is off now? No. Don't be surprised if early next week a deal is struck up by Hughes's team and he throws Mello under the bus. Wouldn't that just be a crazy thing to happen? Because listen, I don't care who you are. If you're my best friend, if you're my brother, you're my mom, your dad, I'm not going to prison for the rest of my life or possibly, taking the death penalty and having a needle banged in my arm and me going to sleep for the rest of my life for John Mello. So maybe the defense plays this card as long as they can, and then they get close to trial. We see this all the time. They get close to trial, they strike a deal and say, "Hey, listen, I'll cooperate and tell you the full story, let you see this phone." That would just make this podcast or interview a lot more interesting here in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered that. That's been my biggest question about this case is if Mello is involved, why hasn't Zachary Hughes given that up yet? Why hasn't he utilized that? And it could be that it's better for them to wait until the last minute right before trial to do it.
Look, I think I
You
have
never
some.
know.
I think I have some loyal friends, but I promise you, I don't have friends that loyal.
Right, exactly. And I could tell from the solicitor's remarks that they did finally access the phone after they went through challenges because Hughes was kind of giving them the runaround on the password, but they did finally unlock the phone, and I could tell that they couldn't get into WhatsApp, but they were able to get some of these messages downloaded, and they he said every day we're getting more and more info from this phone. Do you think that process could still be going on where they're still extracting data from that?
Oh, of course. I think, from what I understood, obviously there's a lot of technology out there, going back to the old iPhone case, right? That's the famous one. um, but technology is advancing just as Apple and these phones are securing their phones more. Look, we have a constitutional right that, we're innocent until proven guilty, and I'm not going to do the investigator's job for them. Now, if you
Right.
decide to cooperate, okay, well, good for you. But in certain situations, um, I'm maintaining my innocence, and I'm innocent until you prove me guilty in a court of law.
Right.
So, yes, I think they're still looking into those phones. But again, there is tools and technology out there to get into these. But again, there's also some great apps out there that are still pretty secured. So I'm sure they're going to, use what they have, and Slister Wilkins is going to do a great job putting his case together. There's no doubt. He's got a great team behind him.
Yeah, I agree. So we are planning on being in Greenville to cover this trial. We're hoping, some point you'll have some time to pop over and talk to us about what you're hearing and seeing during this trial. But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this crazy case from an investigator's perspective.
I appreciate you guys having me on. And again, I think it's important for the viewers, through this case, we're all focused on this, but I do think it's important to take a moment and remember there was still a young child who lost their mother,
Hmm.
and that went through something absolutely horrible and horrific and disgusting that has to live with that for the rest of her life. So my heart goes out to her as well.
Me too. Thank you so much, Chad.
Thanks, Jen.
So I'm bringing in Jen Wood, our research director now. Jen, you conducted that interview with Chad. First of all, I just got to say, I mean, mind blown here. There's so much information, but that last bit that Chad referenced about what any parent would do if they learned about this, that's been a key angle to this narrative. Court filings have zeroed in on that. Walk us through some of these court filings and how they could impact that very debate Chad talked about.
Right. So as we're going into the trial, which begins on Monday, we're looking first before jury selection at these pretrial motions that have been filed by both the prosecution and the defense. The prosecution really does not want the child pornography information to come in front of the jury. They also they're seeking to limit the cross-examination of Bradley Post by the defense. Now, the defense is arguing that this investigation, um, it is relevant to this case. It is relevant to the information that the jury sees. It's going to be very interesting because, if you pull back the lens and you're looking at a motive, what compelled Zachary Hughes to allegedly murder Christina Parcell, and you don't have that evidence, doesn't make sense.
Well, and it's sort of that nice edge where we're going to talk about jury nullification in a minute and the possibility we could have that happen here. But this is kind of that nice edge where you almost feel like if the judge keeps this out, Zachary Hughes is in trouble. He's in trouble because they've got a clear forensic case against him. Chad mentioned the evidence against him is compelling. They got him on camera, and I know his attorneys are saying, "Oh, that's not him." Well, okay, why is your DNA
DNA under her fingernails.
under her fingernails at the crime scene? Okay, but the other side of that knife's edge, if all of this evidence is admitted, then all of a sudden we've got this narrative of, it's almost like A Time to Kill, the movie where there was the justifiable homicide. So, Jen, do you see well, let me ask it to you this way. What are Zach Hughes' odds of being acquitted with this evidence in versus with it out? Let's start with the evidence in. What are his odds of getting acquitted?
I think they're better. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily put a number on it, but it paints a much different picture of the victim. If the evidence comes in and it does appear as though she was a willing participant in the production of these materials, she's not a very sympathetic victim. I mean, which is sad because she's still a victim.
Well, you've raised some points though, and we've debated this too. The victim, Christina Parcell, was in a relationship with this individual, Bradley Post, who's facing all these charges for child porn, child sex abuse material, whatever you want to call it, buggery. I mean, he's got some bad charges. But you made a point that this was a woman, her contentious custody battle with the father of her child, John Mello, the guy we're going to really get into here in a minute. This was being subsidized by Bradley Post. He was paying some serious legal bills. And you raised the point, was she beholden to him? Was this something that she was forced to do? And again, we don't have any evidence one way or the other, but could that be a way perhaps for prosecutors to try and spin it if this evidence does come in?
Could be. I mean, they could soften the landing with that information. So yeah, I mean, there's just a lot we don't know about that aspect of the alleged crimes because Bradley Post is still awaiting trial. We haven't had any significant motions filed in that case. And we haven't seen much of the evidence other than what has come into court filings by the defense in this murder case.
Mhm. So Bradley Post is still awaiting trial on the child pornography,
Yes.
child sex abuse material, buggery, all those allegations. But then there are also pending charges against Zach Hughes and John Mello, the father of the victim's daughter, pending charges related to harassment. And this was really when I think those following the case started to say, okay, wait a minute, there is a connection here between the murderer and John Mello. Specifically, the WhatsApp messages, over 1,000 of them that we know about, that were exchanged, including messages Jen Wood exchanged on the day of Christina Parcell's murder. One in which uh, Hughes is asked, "How did the music research go?" He says, "Good. I'll tell you about it later." Jen, do you think they're talking about music research there, or is that code?
I mean, it's according to the solicitor's office, it's code. They
For
believe
the
it's
murder?
right. They believe it's code. And those pending charges that John Mello and Zachary Hughes, so John Mello hasn't been charged with anything in connection with Christina Parcel's murder.
With the murder, right. No charges
No
connected to the murder.
charges connect him to that. But without John Mello, there is no clear connection between Christina Parcell and Zachary Hughes. He's the only thing that ties those two together. The charges that they are facing are criminal conspiracy and first-degree harassment because there were a series of nude images of Christina Parcell sent to, neighbors of Bradley Post, her neighbors, in June and July of 2021, just months before her murder. So that is, that is going to come up in the course of trial.
Oh,
That
yeah.
is going to be, one of the big things that they do question Bradley Post about is the receipt of those images.
Because that was clear evidence of harassment. And we were talking about those WhatsApp messages
Mhm.
earlier between Hughes and John Mello. And one of the things that I think incriminates them both as it relates to those messages is one of them involves John Mello telling Hughes, "I've got Christina Parcell's new number, harass the shit out of her," is what he
Right.
says in one of those messages. So, you almost wonder, okay, well, maybe you can say you were talking in code at one point, or you can explain away what looks like code talking, but how do you explain away that? I mean, that's pretty cut and
That's
dried.
right, right. So yeah, I just think I think those pretrial motions are going to be very interesting to see how the judge rules on those and
Mhm.
what he allows in.
This case is also unlike any obviously unlike anything we've ever covered. It's clearly unlike anything the state's dealt with before, given the profile and the nature of these allegations kind of coming all together. So there's some interesting media rules for this trial, and we've been reviewing the media order, obviously trying to do our job here at FITSNews, covering it to the maximum level of transparency we can, but also wanting to be sensitive that there is an underage child who's at the center of this. But Jen, walk us through some of the media dynamics here. There's apparently a 30-minute delay, so it's going to be filmed. It's going to be publicly available. Court TV is in on it, which I think shows what a big story it is. Law and Crime covering it. A lot of folks that were at the Murdoch
ABC
trial.
News also,
ABC.
yes. Honestly, I was quite impressed with the media order. The judge um, is newly appointed to the position, and I wasn't really sure where it was going to go. I didn't know if we would even be allowed in. If we were allowed in, what we were going to be. Will we even be able to bring our laptops? But it is extensive, and I can respect that given where some of this evidence might take us. So there'll be a 30-minute delay of any video, no live streaming, but it'll get up quickly. He has allowed witnesses to determine whether or not they want to be on camera. And prior to the testimony, if they've chosen not to be on camera, the media will be told of that. Pool photography and pool footage will be provided. And they also, other than pretrial, post-trial, and sentencing discussions about evidence, if there are discussions about evidence in front of the jury, the media cannot post about them, cannot write about them, and they will not be on camera.
Wow. So it
So,
is restrictive.
yeah,
And it is obviously a delay. That's going to be an interesting component for folks covering this. Certainly, our coverage is going to be interesting how we try to handle all these wrinkles that have been thrown into it. But Jen, you as somebody who's covered these cases before, did the judge get it right in terms of yeah?
I think so, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was very impressed with it. I think he found a very, very fair balance between, knowing the public needs to be brought in and, allowed to see what's going on and, um, potential for some very sensitive testimony dealing with some very sensitive topics.
Well, and let's talk about the outside chance that we may not have a trial because there
Ooh,
is the outside chance
always that chance.
that before this thing kicks off, Zach Hughes says, you know what? I want to share what I know. And I want to tell folks watching this, I was in Greenville County the day that Zach Hughes and John Mello were arraigned jointly for those harassment charges. It was in September of 2023. They were both brought into this steel concrete room at the Greenville County Detention Center to appear before a magistrate. And John Mello was staring holes through Zach Hughes, staring holes through him, and Zach Hughes not making eye contact with him. And then the victim's sister, Lutina Parcell, appeared and spoke and holding up pictures against the glass, you know, trying to drive a wedge between these two defendants. There was a lot going on at that hearing that kind of made me wonder somebody knows something that they're not saying. I don't know what it is. I don't know who it might implicate, but there's a chance that we may not have a trial because Zach Hughes may try to cut a deal.
Absolutely. And, I think you and I were talking about this morning. I'm honestly surprised that John Mello hasn't been charged. Like, I feel like,
In
you know,
connection with the murder.
yes, yes. I feel like it looks from the outside that they've got quite a bit of evidence. And I've always wondered, I mean, maybe they don't have enough. But like I said, the only thing that ties Zachary Hughes to Christina Parcell is John Mello. So I think it's interesting, and I'm wondering, I was sitting back looking and thinking about it, and I wonder, is there a reason? Are they working out that plea deal? Are they going to charge him after the trial starts? I don't know.
Well, and just as we've heard, rumors that a deal could be in the works, we've also heard rumors that John Mello will be referenced as almost an unindicted co-conspirator over the course of this upcoming trial, which, Jen, you think that could happen? We could
Yeah.
see that?
Yeah, I think, yeah, and with this case, there's so many unknowns and so many different facets to it. I think, anything's possible. I don't know that I've ever gone into a trial with this many questions.
Yeah. It is the most complicated, convoluted, taken so many twists and turns since we started covering it. And again, we don't know everything. We're going to hopefully learn a lot more about this case as evidence begins to drop at the trial. And I also thought it was very interesting when you asked Chad earlier in the segment about whether we think there will be new evidence uncovered from Zach Hughes' phone, because we did hear from prosecutors very early on in this process that as time went on, with each day that passed, they were learning more and more information from Zach Hughes' phone. And I think that's significant because we saw, again, back in 2022, one of the first big bond hearings, we saw a lot of evidence from that phone that really laid this narrative that we've been discussing. But have they found more to further that narrative in front of a jury? We're going to have to see. Speaking of juries, Jen, let's talk about jury nullification here. Just for folks who aren't up to speed on it, what is jury nullification?
So, when we were talking about that movie, A Time to Kill, it's a really good example of the potential for jury nullification. It is when a jury believes that the prosecution has proved their case. The defendant is guilty of a crime, but they choose not to find them guilty. So, a good example of when that could happen is, say the father of a rape victim kills the person who raped their child. And the jury says, well, I would have done that too. I don't want to find him guilty. Or if a jury doesn't agree with the application of the law, like, Dylan pointed that option out too.
That's true.
Um, I think
Or they
depend
think they're being prosecuted for a corrupt reason
right,
or yeah.
right. Yeah, there's a lot of reasons that it could happen. It's not common.
Mm,
But I do think that this case, depending on what's allowed in and what evidence the jury sees, there could be that potential.
yeah. And for those watching outside of South Carolina, this is very important because this is taking place at a moment where the national conversation related to vigilante justice in the aftermath of the United Healthcare CEO shooting, that's been a topic that has been widely discussed. Folks saying the ends justify the means in some cases. And we had Victoria Smith, a Low Country lawyer, come on the show recently. We talked extensively about that. Um, Jen, do you think that this is one of those cases where if Zach Hughes ultimately goes to trial and is acquitted, is this a green light for vigilante justice?
I never think there's a green light for vigilante justice. I'm a huge believer in the justice system when it works, and you have to let that happen. But I look at the reports that John Mello made in the years leading up to the murder, and he did have concerns about this.
Yeah.
He did report those concerns to, Department of Family Services. But he also reported a lot of things other than that. So he reported them. They weren't taken seriously. And
We hear that a lot in South Carolina, don't we?
right, I've
On a
heard
lot of
that
different fronts.
so many different times. And
Yeah.
it is sad finding, when kids are in situations like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting component of this case that kind of breaks your heart.
And let's be honest, South Carolina's system of justice, its level of trustworthiness is up for debate.
Oh yeah.
And I'm putting that charitably.
Yeah,
In fact, we
absolutely.
continue to cover this Murdoch saga. A lot of our folks are very familiar with that. We continue to cover some allegations of jury tampering, at the very least, alleged jury rigging. Eh, How do we trust it?
I mean, I don't right now. I don't, and that's sad. And I think there was an opportunity after the Murdoch trial for during the process of the trial and afterwards for people in the position to set an example and set it right to do so, and that has not happened yet. Um, so Hopefully, I'm excited to get up to the upstate and watch a trial.
Jen, you have done just incredible work on this story, not only interviewing Chad earlier, but all of the coverage leading up to this. I want to point folks who are watching this to FITSNews.com. Jen has a story up about the 4 key people in this case. We've gone over them here in this segment. That's a way just to kind of wrap your head around this story because it is so big and so intricate, so layered, so multifaceted and confusing. Um, Narrowing it down to those 4 key protagonists. Jen, I think you've done an amazing job of that, but also diving into these legal issues that are going to really determine, uh, again, assuming it goes to trial, whether Zach Hughes gets convicted or not. Because I'm telling you, if this evidence comes in, we are looking at a real possibility for that jury nullification we talked about. If it stays out, I think Zach Hughes is going to have a one-way ticket to a life sentence. By the way, Hughes has been incarcerated for more than 3 years. He was arrested in November of 2021. He has been incarcerated ever since then. And Jen, before we go, real quick, interesting story. His attorneys had made the point that at the time Zach Hughes was charged with these crimes, he was up in Detroit. He was getting ready to go into Canada to hop on an international cruise line. He could have hopped that flight. He could have gone into Canada and tried to evade. They say he rented a car, came back to Greenville, South Carolina, and turned himself in. They say, look, would a guilty person do that? I don't know. Would a guilty person sit in jail for 3 years
Right,
without
right.
telling what they know? But just all sorts of crazy layers to this, but amazing work, Jen. You got any predictions for next week as this trial unfolds again? Greenville County, South Carolina, this coming Monday, January 13th, jury selection begins on Monday. Any predictions for where this thing goes, Jen?
I think jury selection could take a little longer than anticipated. You know, it's a public case. People are following it. People have opinions. There are a lot of issues that I think they're going to have to address with potential jurors. Um, I think it's going to be very interesting to see who the prosecution calls. Is John Mello going to be a witness? Is John Mello going to be at the trial watching? Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see how they present the case, what's allowed in. I don't have predictions necessarily, but I am anxious to hear what comes out in terms of evidence.
Well, Jen, ordinarily I would put you on the spot about a
Yeah,
prediction, but in this case,
yeah.
given who knows where it could go at this point, I certainly will give you the benefit of the doubt on not wanting to get out on a limb because, again, with this story, it's just crazy. It's unfolded in such a unpredictable way from the start. Yeah, absolutely. No one knows where it's going. That's why you need to tune in next week to FITSNews.com as we take our show on the road to Greenville, South Carolina, the Greenville County Courthouse, downtown Greenville, where Zach Hughes, we believe, will stand trial for the murder of Christina Parcell. Again, the most complicated, convoluted, multi-layered case that we've ever covered here at FITSNews. We're going to do our best to make it make sense. Thanks, Jen Wood, for your help on that.
Thanks.
We'll see you next week, folks. Thanks for tuning in again to a very special edition of the Week in Review.